Hi everyone, Gretchen's here.
No,
Should we go into first?
I think so.
You need this. Hello.
Hi, Rick.
Hi.
Hi. How's everybody?
Okay.
Doing well.
How you guys doing?
Doing okay. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, good.
Superb. Okay. I'm going to mute myself for a minute and just show my my co-host here. I have my daughter helping me a little bit with making sure I get the slides going. So hang on one sec. Okay, I'm back on. It doesn't look like we have any. We've got a couple attendees now. Good afternoon to any attendees that have already signed on. It is currently 1:50. We will start at 2 p.m., so we've got about 10 minutes. So if you are already on the line, just hang with us, and we will start at 2 p.m. Good afternoon, everyone. We are adding attendees to the line every minute, and it is now 1:53, so we will start at 2. Thank you all for hanging in there for a few more moments of silence. Good afternoon, everyone. We are quickly gathering our attendees, and the numbers are going up. We'll have over 70 people on the line, so bear with us for a few more minutes, and we will start promptly at 2 p.m. Good afternoon, everyone. People keep joining the call, so I just want to keep providing these small updates. We are just a couple minutes away from our start time, so hang in there for 2 more minutes, and we will start at promptly 2 o'clock. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We have most of the signed up attendees on the line. There'll probably be a few more people joining, but thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar today. We are going to cover a lot of material, and we're going to try to keep it under an hour. So again, what we're going to start with today is the new normal that we are all dealing with. I certainly never thought I would be presenting a webinar from my kitchen table and have various family members working online all over the house, and hopefully we won't have any major interruptions. I think everyone is up against these same issues right now. So humor aside, while we all try to keep positive during this time, we also need to deal with the practicalities of the situation, obtain as much information as possible, and plan. So today we're going to run through a round the world tour of the updates from the wine and spirits production and import regions. We're going to update all the USA port flows, what's happening in the USA for the various port areas as well as trucking, and then spend a good amount of time on the risk outlet and what you can do to protect your cargo during this crisis. My name is Allison Levitt, and I have been working in logistics for over 35 years, and for the past 7 years been the managing director at WSSA. Yet, like most of us, in those 35 years that I've been working, I have never seen the world shut down in the way it is today. This is a new normal for all of us, or a new non-normal, but we hope to bring our experience to the table to deal with it. On the line with me is Rick Bridges. Many of you have attended other webinars we've produced or events we've hosted with Rick in attendance. Rick is a true expert in the cargo insurance field and one of the most sought after speakers. So we are very lucky to have Rick on our team, and he will be running the risk management portion of this webinar. So welcome to Rick, and you'll hear his voice pretty soon. So just briefly about WSSA, we have, as I said, about 70 people on the line, and while your lines are muted, we do have a chat box. So just for a housekeeping item, if you have any questions or want to jump in at any time, if you go to the More icon, there will be a chat screen that can open up, so you can ask questions as we go along. If we do not get to all the questions that come up over the course of the webinar, we will answer you via email. We do have an entire slide of questions previously sent to us that we'll hit on at the very end of the presentation. So as we do have a few people on the line who have not attended previous WSSA events or any of our webinars, I just want to put this slide up to show you who we are and what we do at WSSA. We run our organization based on 3 key pillars, the first being to negotiate freight rates using the global volume of our shippers to achieve competitive rates and terms with the carriers. The relationships we have with the carriers, again, more important than ever right now. Our second pillar is the risk management program that we run. We manage what we consider the best-in-class insurance program for the industry. And And again, many of you are already active in that program, but we will talk a lot about that today when we get to the risk management portion of the webinar. We also provide outreach, education, and advocacy, which is exactly what we are doing today. Just as a side note, other items in our advocacy agenda right now are the continued work we're doing on the extension and permanence of the Craft Beverage Modernization Act. We're working with many different industry associations to fight for keeping that alive and either renewed or made permanent. We're also working with all the other associations to fight to remove the current 25% tariffs on specific EU products, especially during this time of crisis. So behind the scenes with what is going on with COVID-19, we are all working together to try to help the industry as much as possible get through this difficult time. So we're going to do a quick round the world update on the key trading areas for the wine and spirits industry, and we'll start with North America. For Mexico, I don't know if any of you have seen this on the news, but the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I'm probably not pronouncing that exactly right. I know he's known mostly by his initials, AMLO, so whether he's trying to act like a rapper or just be a little bit crazy, his reputation is not great. He has been on the news, eating at restaurants, encouraging people to go out, and really going against the flow of what we should be doing during this time. So the Mexican people, however, are following shelter-in-place protocols. Our office, the Albatrans office, is in Guadalajara, and the reports are that Guadalajara is basically a ghost town. People are following the protocols and staying at home. As most of you also have read, the border has been closed for non-essential travel, but the trucks continue to move. So you'll hear this over and over again in this presentation that cargo and supply chain, ports, logistics, truckers, freight forwarders are all considered essential. So again, trucks are continuing to move over the border, and there are also no shutdowns yet of any breweries or distilleries in Mexico. So they are under the social distancing campaign from March 20th slated to April 19th. Non-essential social activities are suspended, schools are closed, but cargo is flowing and ports are open. The only update on ports that we've had so far is one of the terminals at Altamira Port is reporting disruption due to only 50% staffing at this port. For Canada, same situation on the borders as Mexico. So the borders are closed to non-essential, visitor, tourist type travel, but cargo is moving. What we are finding with Canada, each province is making decisions in terms of the restrictions on remote working and stay-at-home protocols, but most of the major cities are following the stay-at-home protocol, and most offices, again, are sending their employees home. Ports are open, but we have reported long lines for pickups of containers. There's plenty of equipment in Canada. Canada is an primary import location, so lots of equipment there. However, we are seeing congestion at the ports and expecting further congestion as some of the smaller companies and the companies that are not essential are shutting down, so cargo is going to be left at ports. We will see this in many, many places as well, with congestion at ports piling up. The larger operations in Canada, the big two, LCBO and SAQ, are currently operating as normal. Do have a quick question. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little later. It's about Mexico again, but we'll address that near the end of the presentation. Thanks for asking, and we'll get back to that question. Okay, jumping across the Atlantic to Europe. In the Med area, Italy is the hardest hit country in Europe. Certainly you have seen the reports on the news. The death count is incredible. The tragedy is playing out as we speak. And the Italian government has issued further decrees, and they're even increasing the amount of fines issued to people who are not following the lockdown rules. Those fines are ranging from 400 to 3,000 euros for people caught out on the streets on non-essential business. So they have realized that they need to enforce the lockdown, and measures are going into place to do that. So non-essential businesses are required to close until April 3rd, but agricultural and food industry, including wineries, are considered essential. Again, you'll hear this theme over and over again. For whatever reason, the alcohol beverage industry is considered essential to the livelihood of the world. So whether that's right or wrong, it is good for our industry. Most offices in Italy are working remotely, and certainly some delays in responses from truckers and steamship lines due to remote working and staff shortages. We're also seeing a severe lack of empty equipment in inland depots, especially those in the north, the most affected areas. So in Padova, Bologna, Modena, import containers cannot be accepted in those areas. So again, the northern Italy areas is the hardest hit. There was a decree issued just yesterday that I read last night that is allowing the Italian government to continue lockdown until July 31st. Now, it's not expected to last that long, but they are now permitted to continue it legally. So we'll see how that plays out. In Spain, also a very hard-hit country. Initially, the country borders closed completely, and they have reopened for freight flow, but there was some confusion over that for a couple days. But freight can flow over the borders, but they are checking in terms of health issues of the truckers, and there are some delays at the borders. Inland depots, again, are very, very short of equipment and almost no reefer availability. What we've heard latest is that there are a few reefer containers left in Barcelona port area, but probably by this point they're gone, and there will be more reefers coming in as China opens up again and Chinese freight starts coming in, but whether that cargo will be able to be moved off terminals will really depend on, the type of product. Again, with reefers move perishables. So those are generally foodstuffs and will be considered essential. So while it's maybe not our biggest priority at the moment to worry about reefer containers, they probably will become more available as the Chinese cargo begins to flow. In Spain, like most places, ports, customs still working, logistics providers still working, but there are some reduction in staff and hours. So we will see delays on responses and just potentially slower turnaround time. As of yesterday, again, some of this news, we're just getting changes all the time, so we're doing our best to keep this as current as possible. The lockdown was extended till April 11th. And the other thing that we have heard from the Albatran Spain team is that there is capacity for trucks for inter-European moves to carry exports out of Spain into other parts of Europe, but ocean containers, very, very few at the inland depots. So sticking with Europe, we're moving on to Germany and the Benelux area. Germany, another incredibly hard-hit country, and they've been practicing restrictions from March 18th, with only essential businesses remaining in operation. Certainly delays in responses from carriers and suppliers, and a lot of confusion we're finding in suppliers. This has come up a lot in Germany, where a supplier will say they're ready for pickup, and then the next day say, no, we're shutting down today, whether that's due to lack of staff or other issues. It's hard to tell. But certainly here, again, trucks are in short supply. Inland depots are literally out of stock of ocean containers, and availability at the ports is dwindling. Again, we will see some of that change as China vessels start coming in again, but for now, be aware that availability on containers is limited. What our team that handles a lot of inter-European trade is telling us from Germany is that the price spikes are occurring, very dramatic price spikes, swings of over 1,000 euros compared to, say, prices from a few weeks ago. So whether we can call that price gouging or not, hard to tell. It's supply and demand here, but tough to get trucks for inter-European moves. What they are trying to do in Germany is for all of our ocean cargo, especially cargo coming out of outside of Germany but moving through German ports, is to use the rail and barge services. These are running more smoothly. They do not get hung up in the cross-border traffic as truckers are stopped for health checks. So again, those are some of the measures that we're trying to take to keep cargo moving. In terms of just internal trucking within the area, whether it's Germany or Belgium or Netherlands, getting trucks, getting ocean containers and moving goods from within the country to the ports is not a big problem as long as we can get the containers available. So if we're picking up beer in Belgium, moving to the port of Antwerp right now, not a big problem, but again, we'll see how that goes. In France, I guess the silver lining is that all of the strike action that we've been that's been disrupting trade over the last couple months, that strike action has ended due to the outbreak and the fact that the president suspended the controversial social reforms that were really driving those strikes. So hate to see it end for the wrong reason, but that is something that has helped a little bit in France. On the other hand, truck drivers have been given the opportunity to stay at home. They are not required to work, whereas in most countries are really pushing to keep truckers at work. So there is less service overall. And again, the inland depots are very, very short on containers, and reefers are practically non-existent. So the warehouses are functioning both in Fos and Le Havre, but again, less manpower. There will certainly be delays, but everything is still, open, and wineries are still operating. In the UK, I mean, really, they have just kind of started looking at this crisis just this week. I think yesterday was the announcement when they were going into lockdown mode. And we did hear in the news that Prince Charles is one of the confirmed cases in the UK. They are said going into lockdown mode, but the worry is here that there still have been flights coming in to London from China, Iran, Italy, and we are seeing photos of the subways in the tube in London full of people, less than an inch apart. So there is extreme worry about a massive spread in the London area. So as usual, the metro areas can be more hit. So the feeling is that in the UK, the crisis is really going to ramp up. In Scotland, which is such a huge trading area for us, and the Scotch whiskey flowing out of Scotland is so essential to their economy. The Scotch Whisky Association was meeting yesterday to determine if any of the whiskey companies were going to close. We've just had literally announcements just a couple hours ago that the large distilleries right now are going to remain open. There were some quick notices that there were closures, but right now what we hear is that the big ones are remaining open. We have heard of one significant producer that is going to shut down for 2 weeks, but most of them are remaining open, but some of the smaller ones are closing. Some of the large ones are also looking at pushing out a lot of cargo, everything they have in stock, getting those bottling lines running and pushing cargo into the USA and other markets with the fear that there will be required shutdowns. So there may be a surge of Scotch whiskey over the next few weeks. And fortunately, right now, there is equipment. There's ability to move that cargo. And the good thing is, too, out of North Europe, there's a couple carriers that we work with that are niche carriers that only serve the transatlantic and are not suffering with some of the issues that the carriers that deal so much in the Transpac and China trade. So I think, too, if any of you do ship out of the UK and use the port of Liverpool, that port has been a mess. There's been a lot of delays, both combination of weather and congestion, completely unrelated to COVID-19. So there's still been a backlog there, but we do expect that to be clearing out. And with an overall slowdown in the non-essential business, we do expect to be able to move any of the alcoholic beverage products that are getting pushed out over the next weeks. For Ireland, it is similar to the UK, although they did put in restrictions sooner than the UK. They have been following restrictions since March 14th. And yesterday, an additional announcement came out from the Irish government to as a further notice to stay at home with an extended date to April 19. So that was updated from March 29 to April 19. There has not been a total lockdown. I think we've all heard the pubs were closed, and St. Patrick's Day was not what it usually is in Ireland or anywhere else that celebrates St. Patrick's Day. But the distilleries are continuing to work. The breweries are open. Port and logistics operations are running smoothly. And so far, equipment supply has been fine. But again, very, very few reefers. We're going to touch more on the risk risk part of the presentation about some of the options to deal with the lack of reefers for those of you who really rely on reefer containers. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So jumping to the Southern Hemisphere, in South America, two key countries in the wine world are Argentina and Chile. Argentina has been pretty chaotic politically for years, and things don't tend to run well anyway in Argentina, but they are now under lockdown. We do hear that wineries are working, as are truckers, but on a skeletal staff. And we are expecting delays crossing the border. We don't have any direct reports yet on delays at the Argentinian border. Most of that wine from Mendoza area moves via Chile over the pass and through the Chilean ports. So we're keeping a close eye on that to see if indeed we will get stuck at the border. And the contingency on that is obviously to look at shipping out of Buenos Aires. The transit is a bit longer, pricing's a bit higher to truck from Mendoza area into BA, but if necessary, those are measures that certainly we may need to take. In Chile, really the problem has been less COVID-19, and again, they're just beginning to feel the effects of the virus. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and you would not know there was, any virus in the world. Everybody still, hugs and kisses hello, and no measures had been taken at that time. So they are just gradually ramping up, but they do not have any complete lockdown yet. But the issues in Chile really have been some severe space shortages to the U.S. West Coast. So for any of you shipping wine from Chile to the West Coast and have not already got bookings and have any urgent shipments, there is very, very limited supply of space. Every vessel is full till the end of April heading to the West Coast. So that has, again, not really an impact of the virus, but issues more with change in service and peak season for fruit. Just one other comment on this area of the world, and again, not as much related to COVID-19 locally, but the fact that Chinese manufacturing has been shut down. Most of the flexi bags are manufactured in China. Flexi bags have always been quite difficult to get into Argentina. There's always been restrictions and duty demands. And so there has been a scarcity of flexi bags in Argentina, beginning to flow now as China is manufacturing again, but just something to be aware of if you're looking for flexis out of that area. Reefers also severe short supply, so that is just an ongoing situation in most global areas. So staying in the southern hemisphere, but jumping across the ocean, looking at Oceania. New Zealand and Australia are both countries that are highly sensitive to infectious diseases in both humans, plants, et cetera. They are always very quick to react and shut down situations that are going to affect their island countries. So they have been closed for international visitors, and New Zealand is on level 4 security measures, which, like other countries, entails full lockdown except for essential business. For now, the wineries have been deemed essential and continue to operate, as do the logistics and port sectors, but with any employees able to work from home, they are working from home. Australia also has imposed measures to slow the spread. All mass gatherings canceled, but no complete lockdown yet. And what we have seen in Australia, certainly that wine market has been severely hurt by the shutdown in China. China is the biggest market for Australia wine, so they're going to be definitely in a bad situation. But for USA logistics, Australia is still fully functional and no big issues in terms of equipment or delays right now. South Africa actually had a rumor this morning reported that the port of Cape Town was closing, but from what we have, and this came in, I guess it was early this morning, that while the South Africa government has declared a state of emergency, this was just on the 23rd, from basically today to April 16th, and going into lockdown mode, the ports will remain open for sure, Durban and Cape Town. That's what we have confirmed right now. If anything changes, we will certainly update. We are not seeing, again, any delays right now, but for them, the lockdown has just started. They're really at the beginning of putting their defenses up. But with that said, they have deployed the South African Defense Force. So they are taking militant action to make sure people do follow the protocols. For a really, again, a very hard-hit part of the world, China and Hong Kong, we look at these from our perspective as import markets, very significant importers of both, California wine and USA Spirits, and a significant market for USA companies that were already suffering with the U.S. exports due to the trade war and increased tariffs. So when the virus hit, virtually all import businesses were shut down and only now beginning to slowly recover. And this is varying from area to area. It's often hard to get absolute definite information out of China. But it was the Albatrans Hong Kong office sent me information in an article today about the shutdown of much of the Hong Kong nightlife, and the government has outlawed sales of alcohol in the bars and restaurants. So they're allowing these places to stay open, but banning the sale of alcohol. And I just kind of have to add a little humor here. One of the chief executives in the Hong Kong government, Carrie Lam Shang Yuet, reported or quoted, sometimes people get a bit intimate when they're drunk. So it's kind of funny the things that people will write about right now, but instead of closing those bars and restaurants, they are just banning the alcohol. So some of those venues will close because honestly, it's not worth it for them to stay open if they cannot get their revenue source. But that's what's happening in Hong Kong. On the logistics front, warehouses are open and cargo is flowing at ports with deliveries that were previously, hung up at Chinese ports. They're now going out as businesses reopen, but again, it really varies. Shanghai is very, very slow, and most importers still working from home. In Guangdong area, the flow is almost back to normal, but certainly, orders from the USA have been vastly decreased, and it will take a while to ramp up again. With Southeast Asia, I'm not going to go through each of these countries. These are again, some of them export as well as import, but generally a fairly small element of the trade. Restrictions are in place in all of these areas. And again, with any of the countries that we've mentioned or countries that I have not hit specifically, we cannot hit every country of the world. We don't have time, but email us with any specific requests and we will get you the information. Want to just jump to the USA, and for the most part, the USA ports are running well. They are considered essential, as are truckers. The entire supply chain is incredibly important to the movement of goods right now, and keeping food on the shelves, keeping products out there. I was listening to the president's one of his speeches a couple nights ago. He personally thanks all of the personnel associated with keeping the supply chain moving. These people are putting themselves on the front lines, and we all must appreciate their efforts. With that said, ports, trucking companies, warehouses, they are operating most at full schedule. I put LA at the top of this list as despite a significant dip in the volumes they're receiving due to the China both trade war and then the subsequent COVID closures, this remains one of the most congested port areas in the country and experiencing huge delays on pickups and returns of containers. They are overloaded with chassis. They don't have a lot of storage space, and this will probably get worse before it gets better as the Chinese vessels start coming in and dumping, 13,000, 15,000, 20,000 TEUs onto those terminals that are already congested. So that's an area where we're keeping a close eye. It's not quite as bad in Oakland, but Oakland is also suffering with some congestion, but again, not as significant as LA at this point. We just did get a report in last night that they will be sanitizing the terminals and equipment between shifts. So they are going to continue to operate 2 shifts, but at slightly different hours to accommodate the cleaning. And again, that's what many of the ports are doing, really focusing on the sanitizing and cleaning as much as they can. So moving to the Gulf and Southeast, Port Everglades has cut a day of operation, so they're closed on Thursdays. Miami is fully operational with some terminals decreasing hours. There are some of the Caribbean niche carriers that are really essential for that trade in and out of the islands and their lifeblood. A lot of those terminals and carriers are wholly owned for, Seaboard Marine does a lot of trade in that area. They own their terminal. They're staying on schedule. Again, less affected than some of the carriers that have been in the China trade. Houston was a big issue the other day. They did close for the day on the 19th due to a confirmed case of one of their employees. So they contained that case, they fumigated, and got the port operations back up and running. This was a pretty big lesson for the other ports. There is such immediate blowback when a port closes, and people immediately start panicking. Where are we going to move our cargo? What's going to happen? So all ports really ramped up their contingency planning to make sure that they have the plan in place to quickly reopen should a case be reported, how to contain it, how to fumigate. So again, Houston was a bit of a wake-up call to see a port actually close. On the East Coast, the only port reporting restricted hours is one terminal in Baltimore right now, but all other ports are working as normal while implementing procedures to protect staff and sanitize equipment, things like closing the break rooms, following as distancing protocols as much as possible, hand washing protocols, doing what they can to keep these people safe that are essential workers. Just a couple other notes. Savannah in Georgia Ports is actually reporting that they're advertising additional storage capacity. So I think the storage of containers is going to become an issue over the next weeks as businesses in the USA are forced to shut down, and containers that are arriving need to stay on terminal or potentially get moved to warehouses. Which terminals will have space to store these containers is going to become really important. I think many of you saw a big ramp up of products that you were bringing in anticipation of potentially increased or changed EU tariffs and pushing product out in January, early February to avoid that. And we see warehouses all over the country just completely full, people storing goods they never would have stored. And then to have this virus come on top of that, we are talking about, congestion on a major scale and very little room in warehouses. So we can talk about some of this as it becomes part of the risk management scenario. Just the final USA port there, SeaTac. Obviously, Washington was hit really hard, Seattle area with the virus. The port is, however, operating as usual, but just with very highly intensified cleaning protocols and limited face-to-face contact. So that kind of takes us around the world. I went through that really fast. I wanted to cover as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And again, any specifics, email us, let us know, and we can get back to you. I want to jump now to the risk management portion of this webinar, and we are going to try to get through this in another 30 minutes to keep this at an hour. Rick will be taking over shortly, and just a couple notes on this slide. We do many webinars at least once a year, as well as live presentations on cargo insurance. And we almost always start with this slide, or at least bring it into play. Many of you have seen this, and many of you are aware. But for those of you not, it's I think one of the most intriguing, and not all of us are intrigued by insurance, but both Rick and I love cargo insurance, so we find this intriguing. It is not regulated. It's very different from your home or auto or corporate liability coverage. And what this means for us is that we can design a policy that covers virtually every imaginable contingency that is insurance worthy. And we have worked with Rick and the team at Roanoke and our underwriters for many, many years to continually enhance our policy and build a policy to meet the needs of the alcoholic beverage industry. So from our point of view, it is kind of a good thing that it's not regulated, because we can mold a policy that truly works. The bad end of it is that what many of you may have for coverage may be inadequate. It is said, since it's unregulated, you really might not know what you're getting. So I'm gonna let Rick take over from here and talk a little more about that, and move on through the rest of this presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. It's a good slide to start with, in that I think a lot of both insurance brokers and the recipients of cargo insurance don't realize that there is a lot of opportunity to customize the coverage. And when you have the combined leverage of the membership of the WSSA behind you, we have the ability to do just that for the industry. So we've done some really neat things. We've added coverage for, temperature issues, whether or not the goods are in operational reefer containers or not. Most recently, we've added coverage for damage to the actual container as an add-on due to some of the issues that we're seeing with flexi tank usage. The flexis can move around if not stowed properly, cause damage to the containers, and lo and behold, the shipper is receiving a bill from the steamship line for the container damage, usually in the thousands of dollars. So it's really neat that we have the opportunity to do that. As Allison had mentioned on the flip side, I think there's not enough review of a cargo insurance policy to really understand the nuts and bolts of it. So if you are unsure, certainly talk to anyone at WSSA, and usually I'm part of the policy review process. I'm glad to take a review of your coverages and give you an honest review of whether they make sense for you or not. You can hide the rates and the premium and all that good stuff. We can get really into the nitty-gritty of the policy wording and give you at least an outline of whether the coverage is adequate or not, or where the issues might be. So why don't we go back to basics a little bit more and talk about what if your cargo is not insured. There's a few folks, I think, that we run into from time to time that do kind of roll the dice, or maybe the folks that may still be under the understanding that the carrier is going to cover those losses. And the reality is they're not. As I tell a lot of shippers, a carrier and the freight forwarders and the NVOs offer a service, a defined level of service for a set price. And that defined level of service includes a limitation of liability that is rather significant. And really the intent of that is for the shipper to kind of control their own destiny as far as the level of insurance they want. If carriers didn't do that, freight rates would be 100 times higher if they had to assume all that liability. So if you flip over the back of any ocean bill of lading or even an airway bill or a truck bill of lading, liability is limited significantly. And that extends to warehouses as well. So here's just kind of an outline of the typical limits of liability. You'll note ocean carriers, $500 per package or customary shipping unit. That could very well be a full ocean container. So even if they're liable for the damage, they could walk away legally by writing a check for $500. So it's a significant exposure that the shipper is taking if cargo insurance is not purchased. I do want to, Allison, you mentioned the warehousing as kind of being a little bit of an uptick right now just due to the stoppages. Warehousemen are not under any strict rules to limit liability to any set standard. And that's really important if you're doing any kind of third-party warehousing, is not assuming that the warehouseman is going to insure your goods for you. And also it's important to understand to what level are they really limiting their negligence liability. I've seen some warehouse receipts that limit liability down to $50 per shipment, period. So that's rather significant. The good thing is the WSSA policy allows for warehouse coverage. We can arrange it very quickly. We've got most of the larger wine warehouses already under the policy, and we can add some smaller locations within a very short amount of time. So definitely talk to the WSSA folks about that. Okay, some areas I wanted to kind of cover is, a big question we're getting from a lot of folks. What's this term force majeure? How is it being used? Where does it exist? And then the big question of delay. force majeure is a legal term that you see in a lot of contracts, and it is very much part of any carrier contract or freight forwarder NVO terms and conditions. And really what it's saying is that for any kind of events that are outside the control of that carrier or other entity, they can't be held liable for that. And as a result, they have the opportunity to kind of remove themselves from any liability or any action in that case. So that begs the question, what happens? So we've had some scenarios in the past that I think may be repeated where the carrier cannot deliver the cargo for some external reason, and essentially the cargo insurance policy that WSSA has made allowances for that. We can provide coverage for the extra expenses that it will take to deliver that cargo out of harm's way to potentially an alternate destination. And it's an important consideration that we've got the opportunity to cover the imminent loss under this policy, because most cargo insurance policies will only cover extra expense after the loss. And while it sounds crazy, that theme is echoed in other insurance. For example, the homeowner's policy, the homeowner's insurance company won't pay to cover a tree branch that's about to fall on your house and cut it down and the costs associated with that, but it will cover the cost of putting a tarp over your roof after the tree branch has already fallen on it. It's a little bit of backwards thinking, at least that's what we think. So our extra expense coverage provides the opportunity to reimburse you for proactively limiting the loss and making a good decision in moving cargo to an alternate destination.
Rick, I just want to jump in on force majeure again too, how it sort of relates to the whole situation with the carriers right now, and even with freight forwarders who are declaring force majeure if they can't fulfill contracts and things like that. But on the carrier side, we certainly have seen the ocean carriers in a precarious position financially over the last few years. We went through a major bankruptcy with Hanjin a few years ago, and I think there's a lot of worry right now between the added costs that the carriers had with the IMO 2020 fuel, and many of them the expense of adding scrubbers, then hit with the China trade war, and then the situation with the virus. So certainly there is risk out there with the potential for bankruptcy. And Rick, maybe you could touch on how insurance covers situations where if a carrier goes bankrupt and your cargo is stranded somewhere.
Yeah, good question, Allison. Unfortunately, steamship lines in particular operate on a pretty thin margin on a good day, so this is really going to impact them, I think, rather quickly. And carriers know that it's a possibility, and in fact, within their terms and conditions that will fine print on the back of a bill of lading, there's an insolvency clause, and it really reads very similar to the force majeure clause and says, if we go out of business, any obligation that we have to you to move your cargo to its destination ends at that point. So essentially they're saying that you're contractually obligated to accept that unfortunate fate, and at that point any kind of onward movement of the cargo is on your dime. The fortunate thing with the WSSA policy, we do have that extra expense coverage that can most likely cover that added expense to get the cargo moving onto its intended destination or some alternate location, again, based on the same premise that we would much rather protect the cargo and not have it get further damaged or destroyed. So that's a little plus. I do want to just go back quickly and cover the delay component, where another add-on to the policy is what we call a duration of risk clause. And most of you, if you have seen any, more generic cargo insurance policies, may be familiar with a warehouse-to-warehouse clause that limits coverage to just 15 days at the port and 30 days inland. Quite frankly, 15 days without an event like this is not enough time. We remove that clause and essentially cover the goods while they're in transit for as long as they're in transit without any time limitations for physical loss or damage to the goods. So essentially, we have the coverage for physical loss during delays. There is no coverage, though, for the actual delay. So for the missed opportunity to deliver cargo to a buyer cancels the contract or the sale, there's no cargo policy out there that will provide that level of coverage. So there is a bit of a fine line there. All right, why don't we get to the next slide? Yeah, so some of the things I think that we're seeing with, the rapid changes in carriers and the supply chain. Fortunately, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has waived the hours of service rule that kind of limits the time in the seat that a trucker has and the rest time. But, on the flip side, we're potentially going to have very tired drivers and the potential for more accidents. Coincidentally, some states are closing rest stops, so that's making it even harder for these truckers to pull over and take a much-needed break. We also, as Allison mentioned, have significant port congestion and a lot of cargo really backing up. So as we say in the industry, cargo at rest is cargo at risk for either temperature damage, even water damage into containers that have bad door seals, and then the unfortunate issue of sell-by dates. Fortunately, the WSSA policy has the optional temperature coverage if you're using either reefers, non-operational reefers, or thermal blankets. We have that duration of risk coverage to cover the goods that are sitting in the port for longer than 15 days. I do want to mention the sell-by date issues. If you have product that's sitting and is delayed and is exceeding the sell-by date and you've got non-acceptance of that cargo by the consignee, unfortunately that component on its own is uninsurable. So I would say, as a suggestion, make sure you're as proactive as possible with product that does have a limited shelf life, and there might be some tough decisions that need to be made as to whether that moves or not.
Hey, Rick, a quick question on again, getting back to sort of the domestic trucking. I think that sometimes this is an area that is neglected where, people will insure warehouse to warehouse, but then forget about their deliveries and rely on their truckers to cover the cargo insurance for that time on the road domestically. And I think similar to what you were talking about with those limits of liability for warehouses, same goes for truckers. And with this increased risk, we would say don't forget about insuring the domestic loads. And if you want to add anything on this, please do.
What we see really with any commodity is there's more damage. There's certainly theft, more theft on the domestic side of the delivery, and a confusing area with truckers. Even if you have a great risk management department and they're asking for certificates of insurance, and the trucker might provide a certificate showing that they have cargo coverage for X amount, it's usually $100,000 or maybe $250,000. Keep in mind that limit of liability on their insurance policy is further limited to their tariff or their bill of lading terms, which in most cases limits liability down to 50 cents a pound or some similarly very low number, again, based purely upon the negligence of the carrier. So things like acts of God, even theft from a locked trailer, trailer overturn, they're not covered. And one of the areas that we see a lot with alcoholic beverages, employee theft, so it could be an inside theft-related issue. A cargo policy of a motor truck carrier is not going to provide coverage for employee dishonesty. So there's going to be really no coverage at that point. So all the more reason to really use the WSSA policy for the domestic legs as well as international.
Thanks, Rick.
Welcome. All right, so, we've talked about this in the past, Allison, and I think, we've had some real successes with helping some members on, covering this exposure that may not be readily apparent right away. But I think it's vital that we talk about it today, just because of all of the, the uncertainties that we have with our potential trading partners. So I throw out here some examples, and one is selling on open account terms, and on the flip side, it's purchasing on prepaid terms. There's probably not a lot of prepay terms in this audience, but certainly a lot of open account sales terms. And if you have a situation in which the party that you're selling to is the party responsible for insuring the freight, they're the ones that are on risk in transit for part of it or for all of it, and they have not paid you, you're relying on them to pay you at some future point. If their insurance does not respond, or if they do not have cargo insurance at all, there's a loss, and as a result, they do not pay you, that obviously becomes your exposure. Albeit a contingent exposure, it's one that you can insure under the WSSA policy. The coverage is very inexpensive. It's great sleep easy coverage, and I think it makes a lot of sense to start considering this, not just for your international transactions, but for your domestic transactions as well. Obviously on the flip side, if you're having to prepay, it really works in reverse. This is, a coverage that's called many different things under a policy, but often forgotten by kind of the more, generalist insurance brokers that just don't see these claims day in and day out. So I really urge you, if you don't have it, to talk to Allison and her team on how to get it.
And I would say too, on again, the many parties now, and more than ever, suppliers or even the USA seller or importer is selling on a CIF term, and that I in CIF can be pretty limited, as Rick is saying. So we've had many instances where we've had a member that does take this contingency insurance, and they buy product on a CIF basis. And there is a claim. We've had quite a few issues with theft on some high-end spirits, where when they go to place the claim to the person who is supposed to hold the insurance, that insurance policy has, a $20,000 deductible, or, doesn't cover theft, or doesn't cover mysterious disappearance, or, only pays out on a portion of the claim. So that contingency insurance kicks in, and they are made whole. So as I said, for a very low price, it can give you a lot of peace of mind. And I think, as I said, the enhanced risk arena that we're in right now, it just again adds to the potential for these type of situations. So again, we're always surprised when people don't buy it because it's so cheap, but we realize that when you're talking to your financial controller or CFO, and it's another expense when they say that look, it's already insured, we don't need to deal with it. Sometimes it's good to take a look at this and kind of see how it affects your bottom line, and if it's worth it. So something to talk about.
Definitely. We also say the same thing about the control of damaged goods clause on the WSSA policy. And, for those that do want to maintain a high-level brand image, it's really important to make sure that if there's any potential, damage to the merchandise, that you have the option to destroy the merchandise, and rather than have the insurance company take those goods and kind of do with it as they wish. Believe it or not, most cargo policies don't have that added coverage, and they will take the goods and try and sell it in the salvage marketplace. That can cause significant issues either with your supplier and your contractual relationship there. As I mentioned, your brand image, product warranty, product liability issues as well. So we have that added advantage to really take better control of the freight and your destiny. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think. Are we ready? Let's see. Did we cover STP yet, Rick? Sorry, I was answering a question online.
Yeah. So stock throughput is another fancy name for cargo insurance, and really what it is bolting together transit coverage and storage coverage, and we can do that under the WSSA policy. The advantage is that you've got one underwriter on your transit and storage, so less opportunity for two underwriters to point the finger at each other and say, that loss didn't happen on my watch, it happened on yours. So it's an added advantage with the warehouse coverage. You get all of the extended coverages that we've talked about, and it's kind of one-stop shopping, and it just really makes it easier to cover it all the way through.
Great. And Rick, relating to that, we just had a question pop in online from a attendee asking about how the warehouse coverage works separately from their overall business insurance policy. And I think, I'll hand it over to you, but basically, if your overall corporate policy does have warehouse coverage, that is something to take a look at. You may have that written into your policy. Your corporate policy may only cover your own warehouse and not third-party warehouses. So, Rick, you want to add a little to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of variables here, but, we'd be glad to take a look at it offline. If you do have a business policy, likely it could cover your stock, your property in either your own warehouse or a third-party warehouse, but those locations really need to be specifically named on that policy with a set limit. I will say if it's on like a business insurance policy, it's not going to cover some of the things that we're going to pick up, like the control of damaged goods, like quake and flood, and things like that. And I would probably assume that our policy for WSSA is going to have a little bit more reasonable deductibles for things like windstorm and other events like that. So it's definitely worth kind of a comparison. But as Allison mentioned, definitely look at the policy, make sure those locations are named, and there's adequate limits. And another point just kind of popping up to my head is the fact that your limits in your warehouses may be spiking considerably now, so it's worth taking a look at that to make sure you do have limit adequacy there.
We do always tend to talk about insurance during times of crisis. So, after Superstorm Sandy and after the Napa earthquakes, that's when we had a lot of calls with people saying our policies didn't cover these natural disasters. So this situation is a little different, but again, it does make us look at all those different variables. We are running fairly low on time, and we do have a bunch of questions that were sent in, which we will try to get through pretty quickly, just to make sure we touch on the items that people have sent us. So I think this first one is kind of an interesting one, obviously very pertinent to what's happening today. So if cargo has been found to have been exposed to someone who has a virus, is the shipper liable? And Rick, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is no. It's very difficult to try and point to where the the infection might have started or how it occurred. But as far as whether it's a cargo insurance policy or any other policy, quite frankly, even general liability, it's going to be really no coverage for that kind of thing. I will say if there's any kind of fumigation that goes on containers and causes any kind of damage, whether it's residue or anything like that, the WSSA policy has coverage for fumigation damage, but as far as the actual liability to the shipper, I think we're going to be hard-pressed to find that liability and or find insurance that would cover that.
Yeah, I think, and on the second question, we've talked about that with the extra expense and the rerouting, and I think we've covered that. But obviously, like I said, if we hear of a port closure and your shipment is on the way to that port, and there's an expense to reroute, that can be covered.
Yeah. Unfortunately, flipping to the next question, though, of the pure delay component and the non-acceptance, unfortunately, that's not going to be covered in the cargo insurance environment anywhere. I wish we had that opportunity to cover it. As a broker, I'm always asking underwriters if ever they can do that. And, maybe in my lifetime, we will find a solution, but not as yet. So that pure delay and loss of sale because of the delay is not insurable. The second component, go ahead, Allison.
I think that's, were you jumping to the fourth question, or, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of covering that fourth question, so as far as the non-acceptance component, really there would be no coverage for that, but certainly if there was physical loss or damage during that delay or stoppage, of course we're going to cover that. So
Great.
Unfortunately, the delay in it of its own is really not insurable.
Okay, so I think we with the next question touches on what we talked about with the issues with the truckers on the roads, less people, less security perhaps at terminals, less security at warehouses, more potential for theft, more potential for organized crime to step in these situations. So some of the ways to mitigate, Rick can get into some of the tips on that, but absolutely, you can be covered, but Rick, why don't you touch on some of the things that you were talking about for mitigating that risk?
Yeah, I mean, it's really common sense things. So if you're using, local truckers or even large truckers, trying to minimize the potential for freight sitting, whether it's sitting in a yard or outside, those are opportunities for thieves to either steal a full container load, full trailer, or break into a container. Unfortunately, alcoholic beverages is a target commodity on a good day, and I think with the issues that we have around us now, it's probably going to be even more of a target. So it's really just those common sense things. High security container seals. If you're not using those, you might want to consider using those. Because if it's a row of containers and a thief is looking at 5 or 6 doors, he's going to go after the one that he can get into the quickest and the easiest. So the high security seals really, buy you a little bit of time and may allow the thief to kind of pass on to the next target. And aside from that, it's just having open conversation with your truckers. Making sure that, they're making, good decisions with, trailers that might be loaded and, sitting for a time. Are they putting pin locks or, locks on the kingpins? Are they locking the landing gear? Very simple things like that really go a long way to prevent theft of alcoholic beverages.
There was a question online about who makes sure high security seals are used, and this can be done in a few ways. If we're talking about your ocean container, it's requesting that if it's a shipper load container, that whether your freight forwarder can provide that seal to the shipper or your shippers can actually purchase those seals. With domestic trucking, it is a little more complicated. You can control it a lot more if it's a full truckload than if you're, just shipping LTL and, just a few pallets for delivery. But Rick, do you have any comment on how to communicate that with either your forwarder or your truck broker or your trucker?
Yeah, so if you're not the party that's affixing the seal. The forwarder can certainly help, and they can work with their overseas agent as well, to get a supply of the high security seals. C-Lock is a big name. It's kind of a household name for the better security seals. They're available. You can probably get them into your supply chain rather quickly. Truckers, on the other hand, they're supposed to be locking their trailers at all times. So maybe it's worthwhile just having a conversation about that. If you're moving very high value loads, you might want to have a conversation with the trucker about a team drivers. It's two drivers in the cab. That means the truck is usually moving. One trucker's taking a break while the other's driving. As long as the cargo is in motion, that's when you're really reducing the risk. Try to avoid the hub and spoke type networks of carriers if you can. Exclusive trucks if you can afford it, or minimizing the amount of handling in between. These are all, I think, ways in which you can kind of reduce the theft exposure.
Okay, we're getting close on time, and I know people need to drop off and get back to work. We'll cover this. I think we've already talked about the sell-by dates in the last question. So I'm going to jump into the reefer situation. As mentioned earlier, there is a shortage of reefers on a global basis right now. So what we would suggest, and one of the things that is fairly unique to our policy, and some of you might have it in your own policies if you're not using us, but temperature coverage insurance when shipping in an insulated or NOR, non-operating reefer container. So what we offer is if you are using insulation instead of a reefer, you can be covered for heat damage with just a small addition onto the normal insurance. So again, this becomes a decision on very, very high-end wine that you do not want to have any temperature fluctuation. You have got to use a reefer, and you probably want to wait for that equipment. If it's, again, this time of year where it's not too hot, not too cold, it is a good time to use insulation, and or cargo that can suffer with a little bit of fluctuation, we do say, go with insulation, and that at least keeps the temperature fluctuations down and also gives you the opportunity to insure for any damage. We also suggest in those containers, especially for higher end products, use a temperature sensor, whether it's just like a Sensitech, flash drive type of sensor, or a more sophisticated sensor. This does help you see your temperature fluctuations as well as prove out any potential insurance claim. So I think that's really important right now to touch on with the shortage of reefers, and it will have to be a case-by-case decision, but we can certainly, try to guide you on that, as well as discussing how coverage works in insulation and the opportunity to use those temperature recorders. I think that is just about it. There were a couple questions. Many of you have sent the question online whether you can get a copy of the presentation. We are happy to provide it. I've written down some of the names of people who have requested it, but please email us if you want a copy, and we'll send it right out. I think that there was also a question early on, and I'm not sure if the person is still on the line, regarding what happens for example, in Mexico, if the agency that prepares the certificates for tequila and mezcal, if that agency shuts down, that is still one of those agencies and one of those requirements for actual original documents. So people from the CRT or CRM for the tequila or mezcal actually go out to the distilleries and do the inspections and come back to the office and issue the certificates. And it's a very antiquated process. We actually were with the head of that agency a couple weeks ago at the Discus conference and had a discussion about when they were going to go automate those certificates. And that is kind of an ongoing conversation. It's probably a ways away, but we will check in with him in terms of what the expectation is should that agency close down. We are actually seeing an uptick in orders of tequila and mezcal lately, and we absolutely have to have those certificates to move the cargo. So we'll do a little double checking on that and get back to the specific person who asked that question. Again, I think that's about it. A huge thank you to Rick. I know we have run over a little bit, and we just appreciate the fact that Rick spends so much time with us and also is willing to analyze any of those policies and help us walk through details. We do have some of the questions that came in that we will answer offline, and we're here for you. We really wish everybody the best during this difficult time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and let's keep those beverages moving. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Allison. Take care.